And my final guest today is another amazing friend of mine, dear friend, Colin Cowherd. And for those of you who don't know who Colin is, he's the host of The Herd, which you can find anywhere. Just Google it. It airs simultaneously on FS1 and the Fox Sports Radio Network. He's all over the internet. Just look him up, Colin Cowherd. Colin is also the author, two-time best-selling, New York Times best-selling author, two different books, You Heard Me and Raw. We're going to be talking about those books in a moment. And if he didn't have enough to do already, he is the new founder of a new podcast and digital media company called The Volume. Colin, welcome. Thank you for joining us for Climb.
Oh, it's great to see you. And we were just talking before we went on about the pictures behind you. Steve Bridge, our high school football coach, and then your brother Jack, who he and I were inseparable in high school. You had gone to the Air Force Academy. You were the smart of the three of us. You were the most willful, aspirational. We were a couple of beer drinking, don't tell your parents knuckleheads. But we had a great upbringing, great life together.
Well, and that brings me to the first book, my favorite book, the best book of all time, probably because on page 3, and my brother's still a little irked about this, because on page 3, it says my brother's best friend, Brad Jones, and his name isn't mentioned anywhere. So it's my 15 minutes of fame. Well, it's forever in fame, right? And I love, it's a story you tell pretty regularly on the air. We're going to tell the story in a minute, but it's a story you tell on the air. And every time you tell it, I get phone calls from my friends saying, did Colin just talk about you? But let's talk about page 3, because what you're referring to is a story I told you when I was 16 years old and my junior year playing football. And you also tell a story about when you were 8 and your dad and the Harlem Globetrotters. So in both of those stories, really, of the first 4 pages of your book are about those two stories and how they impacted you. So let's start there. Why don't you tell the audience about those stories and the impact?
Well, I grew up in a small rural town on the coast of Washington. And so I always felt very removed from even local pro teams. That was the big city. That was Seattle. That was the Space Needle. That was a science center. That was big buildings. I was a small town kid. So almost like you would go, if you were going to one of those big churches or to watch a motivational speaker, you would be in the crowd and you would look up at Tony Robbins. I felt like I was looking up at Seattle as a small town kid. There was a fear and a curiosity about the big city. I had a very protective British mother who was not going to let me go there unless perhaps it was with your family to a Seahawk game, which I also remember. And so when you're a little kid and the Harlem Globetrotters come to town, or Brad Jones, the brother of my best friend Jack Jones, tells you a story about going into a locker room of then the world champion Raiders, it sticks with you for life. And I had 2 early moments in my life, which I detail in the book, that, what you see on television is not necessarily always the truth. That is refined and sandpapered for a higher quality broadcast. And so 2 stories that I heard, the first 2 that I can recall, really showed me, as I wanted to be a broadcaster, that there was a story behind the story. And my dad was an optometrist 20 minutes from my hometown, as you know, Aberdeen, Washington. And the Harlem Globetrotters were in town in Hoquiam. They weren't really, as I joked, they weren't really the Harlem Globetrotters. They were like the East Harlem Globetrotters. We didn't get Meadowlark Lemon, right? So my dad was a workaholic. He picks me up. We rush. The gym's almost packed. We're kind of late. And we pull in to the Hoquiam basketball facility, but we kind of go into an alley, a wrong alley, and in his Buick Riviera. And the Globetrotters, the bus is there. And they're out there like drinking beers, like Olympia or Rainier beer. And I was a little boy, and I remember sitting next to him. My dad's thinking, I could see my dad like react like, oh, crap. He backs out. We get a parking space. We go in. I remember we sat like right in front, but we had good seats, but we were like late, like the game had just about started. And I just couldn't get that I couldn't unsee that. And I'm like, the whole game, as I'm watching them play, I'm thinking, they're like drunk. They're just, this is just entertainment. Like, I was so serious. And couple that with a story you told me years later about you had won something, I think through your grades, you a leadership counselor or something, you had won some award and you got access or something, if I recall, to one of the rewards was you could go before the game, a Seahawk Raider game, into the locker room of the Raiders. And the Raiders had these legendary players, Kenny Stabler, Bolitnikoff, Fred Branch, Cliff Branch, Matuzak. I mean, they were really the bad boys of the NFL, right? And the Seahawks had squeaky clean Jim Zorn and Sherman Smith, and they were so likable, right? And you went into the locker room and they were sitting there smoking and playing cards. And I immediately flashed back to the Globetrotters. And I remember thinking, after you told me that story, that if I was ever a sportscaster, that I was going to tell people the story behind the story. That anybody could just say, I wanted access, because you'd given me access and nobody else I knew that story. And I got, by accident, Globetrotter access. And it really framed how I saw the world. That I wanted to tell people, I wanted to work sources and have information and access other people didn't have, because I couldn't be the only person fascinated about that. And so I think my career has largely been built on the belief that storytelling and looking behind the corners and calling sources and being connected. Anybody can have an opinion, but the opinion is more valid and justifiable based on correct sourcing. So we often think of journalists as, people with a hat, a press badge, and a piece of paper and a pen. But I can be a journalist too. It's called my iPhone, and I text and call. I mean, I have a cool phone. I got a lot of famous people on it, and I work those sources, because I think what separates me from a lot of people is access and information and stories they won't get other places in a very, very competitive business. And so I think it's another example how your childhood can really frame how you view the world. I remember one time, Brad, about 15 years ago, I was at a gym working out, and I had, my daughter was like 4. My son wasn't born yet. And she talked about, this female child psychologist talked about, she goes, the first 6 to 7 years of your life are really valuable. And if you're loved and there's no physical or verbal abuse, your kids are safe. They'll overcome virtually any obstacle. It's to be loved and almost spoiled and there for your kids. And I go back to my childhood and I think of just those early visuals and those early stories, and how even today I have this insatiable need to know the story behind the story. Now, you could argue that I'm jaded or I'm cynical, but I think a little bit of that is healthy in my profession. That don't take the PR firm's word for it. Don't take the politician or the coach's word for it. There is something, I always say, stories only leak if somebody wants them leaked. Like, I've had a lot of secrets in my day and they don't get out because I don't win if it gets out and they don't win if it gets out. Stories are out because somebody wants it out. And my job is to figure out who wants that story in the paper. That's the story behind the story.
Well, in your second book, you start off by talking about some things, but Howard Cosell comes up, and I smiled when I read that, because back in the day, I remember in my parents' living room, you impersonating Cosell, and us just laughing our butts off as you were doing an amazing job, by the way, an incredible
Right.
Howard Cosell impersonation. And then all the stats that you knew, which just blew our minds with how early, and that was again when we were in high school. So I'm not going to ask you to do a Howard Cosell impersonation unless you really want to. But
I did everybody. I think I impersonated local announcers. It's funny. I don't know of the people watching this. Do you have any the state of Washington pharmacists?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So it's so funny because I talked to Bob Rondo. So I told Bob Rondo was the voice of the Huskies for 30
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, sure was.
And I used to listen to Bob as I was a college student and write down notes about his pacing and his tempo and his teasing. You'll get a kick out of this because you listened to him for years. And so I had said on a radio station in Seattle how I admired Bob Rondo, and he has no idea, but I literally stole things from Bob Rondo, little techniques. And they said, oh, give us a Bob Rondo impression. And there's not a lot of people doing Bob Rondo impressions. And so I did the Bob Rondo impression, and Rondo was listening, and he's like, that's a really good Bob Rondo impression. So you'll appreciate this. I was a kid. I can remember this. I formation, backs divide. Danny Green in motion, left to right. Humilin back. Up the left sideline. Touchdown, Washington. And Rondo heard it. And he literally called the station. He said, hey, get Cowherd to call me. So I called Bob Rondo. And I told him, I said, your pacing, your tempo, your staccato style. I'm like, I used to take notes on all these guys. How would Cosell? Indubitably an outrageous claim, but Frazier, down goes and I would watch, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't get rid of those and probably till I was late 20s. So I had impersonated so many people that it was hard to find my own voice until I was 27, 28, because I was doing 8% Costas, 12% Howard, 9% Rondo, because I had so many of these kind of seminal voices. I taped everything. I listened. The way they would talk about confusing situations and be word efficient. So it took me years and years so I didn't sound like an 8% knockoff of everybody I'd ever listened
to. Well, when we talked before, you actually talked about how there were people along the way, every step of the way, that helped you progress in your career. And I recall, I recall after you graduated from Eastern that, I think, I'm not sure where your first gig was, but I remember, coming out and seeing you in Vegas when you were the voice of the Vegas, Las Vegas Stars, the minor league baseball team. And you donated those cool hats for my my Boys and Girls Club baseball team.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and and then I think from there, and then from there on to Portland, where you actually started the Herd.
Yep.
I mean, that thing's been going on. You started the Herd, and what year was that in Portland?
Well, I would say, so I've been at Fox 6, ESPN 10, 16. So about 16, so I was there. I would say that was 22 years ago where the Herd, 22 to 23 years ago where the Herd, where I officially named the show the Herd.
Yeah, that's just amazing. But, the thing I think that caught me was how you talked about how there were people along the way, every step of the way. And I think personality has a lot to do with that, being personable, likable, that you're really trying to make a difference. So, tell a little bit about that experience.
Well, this would be a foreign concept to somebody who listens to me, because once you go on the air, you are going to be theatrical. I am talking for 3 hours. I don't want to be monotone. So there is a performance art to what I do. You could be Vin Scully. You could be Jim Nantz. There is Joe Buck. You have to know how to rise to the moment, how to make it special. And when I do my show, being authoritative and saying stuff with conviction matters. But I always feel the two things that have driven me is fear and humility. Is that growing up with my dad was a successful doctor, but he was an alcoholic, and it tore my family apart. And there's always been, I've gone to therapy enough to know that I think what drove my career for the first 20 years of it was fear of going back, fear of being irrelevant, fear of being isolated, fear of not making it. When you come from a small town and you don't have a great support system, I think I'm more joyful today. The last 10 years of my career, I've really put my arms around it. I'm much more appreciative and grateful. The first 10 to 15 years of my life, it was a race against failing. I didn't enjoy it as much. Not that it wasn't, I traveled. I loved doing what I did, and the audience wouldn't be able to tell. But I think there's a humility when you grow up in a small town from a broken family. You don't want to go back. And that little 9-year-old boy is, that's always in me. I think the other thing is I'm eternally grateful. I know I live an incredible life. I've got my health. I take my 1 milligram of Propecia because I don't want to have all my hair. I need hair. I do not look good without it. That is the one thing. But, I tell my sister all the time, Marlene, she still lives right by our parents' house. And I tell her all the time, my dad was a doctor. My mom was an honor student. And I'm like, I got their brain power. I got their curiosity. I said, both my kids are curious. I said, my dad was a doctor. My dad's brother was a doctor. My mom was just a thoughtful, funny, witty British woman. And I said, I got a head start in everybody. Like I had really curious, thoughtful parents, and they knew your parents. And I feel very lucky for that. I think sometimes it's the disease of me thinking, oh, I am doing this all on my own. I'm so smart and I'm so successful. And that's kind of the disease of me, which is not understanding how valuable teamwork, sacrifice, luck to some degree, having the right DNA, that you don't have chronic illness. I feel I've been very fortunate. And again, if you listen to me on the air and the bravado, you'd think, oh, please, this guy's, but a lot of that is understanding sort of the mechanism of theater. When you talk to yourself for 3 hours a day, you got to have 1 or 2 screws loose. I mean, it's not normal to talk about. Larry King once, I was on Larry King's show, and Larry King said, he goes, you talk to yourself for 3 hours a day. And I said, Larry, you should hear the other 14. It's even more entertaining. He goes, really? And I said, yes. How do you think I talk all these rants out? I jog, I talk to myself, I drive. So, I just feel very lucky. I guess in the end, to wrap a bow around it, I just feel very grateful and very lucky to be who I am and where I am and the family I had.
But I think that, to your credit, that's about adapting.
Yeah.
And I think, that's in tying this into our audience a little bit, one of the things that I think all of us in business have to do is adapt. Things have changed dramatically over the last 30 years. They've changed incredibly in the pharmacy world over the last 40, 30, 20, 10, and 5 years. Business is very different. We've been in business for 23 years. It's also changed dramatically.
Yes.
And you're either changing or dying is the way
Yeah.
I see it. You're either adapting or you're failing. And so I think business has to maintain relevance. And I talk to the pharmacists about this all the time, and pharmacists about this. And that's what this CLIMB, which stands for Care, Lead, Innovate, Motivate, and Balance, as I told you previously. And that's what this is about, is bringing speakers and guests and panelists that can talk about the things that they're doing to adapt to the changes in the marketplace. I would imagine that you have seen, well, I know you've seen major changes in the media world. So let's just for this, let's discuss that just a little bit. How do you maintain relevance?
Well, my life, like yours and the people watching, we have multiple actions a day. We get up, we go to the bathroom, we shower, we drive to work. The actions of my life are largely simple. They're repetitive. I'm a creature of habit. My life will be shaped, however, by how I react to things. A moody boss, a detour on the road, a schedule gets canceled, a personal snafu, poor judgment. And so I tell my kids this all the time, is your life will overwhelmingly be shaped by how you react to a nonlinear, imperfect world. It won't be your actions. We do the same things every day. I mean, literally, if somebody wanted to, if I was a mobster, I'd be dead by yesterday. I mean, I do the same path, the same thing. I'm the most predictable human on the planet. You know, Vinny the Chin, go get this guy on 3rd and Elm. He'll be there at 2:15 every day. But my reactions, I think I've gotten a lot better, and a lot of that is coping skills and emotional discipline. You know, I've taken a lot of cues from the athletes I cover. I think Tom Brady's not the most physically gifted receiver or quarterback, but what Tom is, he's the most emotionally disciplined player I've ever seen. From the commitment to his body, the commitment to learning, the commitment to vulnerability, the commitment to practicing being sacked. His emotional discipline is the greatest I've ever seen. LeBron James is a great example of courage and the willingness to do things that are wildly unpopular and not worry about how they're viewed and not be consumed by how people are going to react to his belief system based on his childhood. So, you know, I when I look at my life and I try to just be curious and watch how people do things, I think the way I've maintained relevance is the ability to pivot quickly. I try to keep my life very simple. I do content. So this is what I do. I produce thought-provoking content. I think about it all day. It just comes down to finding the platform that's growing and discarding the platform that's dying. So I've always thought about this in my business is there's a lot of noise out there. I try to distill what I do down to one word: content. Be thought-provoking. And I know that my content makes salespeople money and my management money and me money. So I know if I create good content, it will find a home and very smart people will put it on the platforms to succeed. My business changes so often that I used to sign contracts at ESPN, and halfway through the contract, a new platform would emerge like podcasting, and I wouldn't even be getting paid for it. My company would be making money off it. So I started signing shorter contracts because the platform, TikTok, you sign a contract, TikTok, you're like, you know, you don't want to be in a 7-year contract where the company makes a fortune off your image. So I just think, and I don't know the pharmaceutical business well at all, although, you know, I hung around at your dad's pharmacy for most of my childhood. But the ability to, if you really trust your acumen and you trust your values and you trust your brand and your service, just be looking for opportunities to double down on what works, and new stuff works all the time, and discard things that don't. Loyalty is for your family and your children. It's for a best friend. It's not for a product. If it's not working, don't use it. I say this all the time. And I've said this around my bosses. I am loyal to what's working. Not you. My audience may not follow me. I'm loyal to me and the truth and the platform that's growing. And I think in your business, there could be new heart medications out. There could be new services available. You know, I think, and it sounds like, boy, that's cold. It's not cold. It's survival. And we're all playing economic survival in a world that is incredibly fluid now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, you know, I think one of the things that frustrates me from time to time when I'm talking to pharmacists is, you know, complaining about things and not adapting and changing, because there are plenty of businesses and there are plenty of opportunities to succeed. There are plenty of opportunities to make money, but you can't make money the way that you used to make money. And in your case, it's a changing platform, but really in the pharmacy world, it is as well. It's a changing platform. It's changing services. It's just a completely different environment. When we were kids and we were playing in the back room of my dad's store, you know, most of the business was being paid for by cash. It wasn't insurance money and it wasn't government money. People were coming in and paying cash for prescriptions in the 70s. You know, that isn't the case today. It represents like 12% or something of the overall money that is received in a pharmacy is in the form of cash payments for prescriptions anyway. So businesses have to adapt. And so I think that's, the key takeaway that I continually try to push forward and climb with all of the speakers that we bring to the table. So let's talk a little bit about your new company, because this is really about adapting, right? You have contracts with Fox and iHeartRadio, and then you have a new company that you founded, and you have 12 employees?
14. I've added 2 since we last talked.
Nice.
It's a small company. No, this is a prime example, and I had a real barrier here because my network television employer and my syndicated radio employer pushed back on this. But I had a steadfast and strong belief. They thought, oh, it's a threat. Colin's going to create his own company and leave. It's going to dilute our TV audience and our radio audience. If people can hear Colin on his podcast company, The Volume, why would I go to his TV and radio? And I argued the opposite. I argued that if I make myself more available to the audience, they are then deeper invested in me. I can get Colin all the time. Oh, so my network companies thought, they'll peel off us. And I said, no. I said, and I gave them, I tried to simplify it. I said, I sleep for 7 hours a day and I work for about 7. Now, that's because I have a staff. It used to work a lot. It used to be a 9 to 10 hour day. So 14 hours a day, let's put it up to 16 for the average person, right? They sleep 8, they work 8. Okay, that's 16, I have 8 hours left. If I exercise for an hour, eat for an hour, nap for an hour, which most people don't, I have 5 hours left. And my takeaway, and I just laid it out for them. I said, what do we do in those 5 hours? I said, we're on our phones. We're looking for content, mostly unhappy with the content provided. So that if I provide more, it will get people more deeply invested into me and they'll listen to all of my stuff more. And that's exactly what has happened in 7 months. My radio ratings have gone up, my television's gone up, and my podcast is growing. So I just simplified it. I said there were barriers, there were doubters, there were critics, but again, the solution was in focus on content, dedication to my staff and my product. I didn't have a lot of money to start this company. I pay one employee. I do it for free. As I grow the company, I'm not going to take a salary for 2 years, but it was a clear vision. We believed that we wanted to hire people. We couldn't compete against networks. We wanted to hire people who talk sports, but had really different backgrounds and angles on sports. We hired a woman who was a pro wrestler and a comedian. She's a riot. We've hired, a professional comedian who's a sports gambler. We fired, and it took a lot. But our thing was little budget, pushback from corporate entities, but we're going to create this tunnel that we think is going to make people see a different side of me they've never seen, a little more raw, edgier side. They will not bail on my corporate projects. They'll be more fascinated with me as an entity overall. And it has worked, but it's not easy. There are barriers, there are pushbacks to everything.
Well, and really it's just about more ties, more stickiness, right?
Yes,
and
that's exactly
this is
it.
something now, relating this to pharmacy. The day of just filling prescriptions, that day that ship sailed, and pharmacies have to do things like clinical services. The more things that they can do to get people to come in the door, rather than just for a prescription, that becomes imperative. When you and I were kids, you went to the drugstore for shampoo and deodorant and Tylenol and those things, and you went to the grocery store for groceries. Today, grocery stores carry all those other things. Now, if you don't take medication, then you don't have any reason to go to the pharmacy, right? I mean, you can get all the things you need at Costco or at the grocery store. So you have to give people a compelling reason to come into your business. And you need multiple points, just like what you're talking about, multiple points of contact. So today, pharmacies can do vaccinations, not just COVID vaccinations, but, pre-COVID, flu vaccines, things of that nature. You can do disease state management, medication therapy management, all of these types of things that you can do, offering to your patients to get them in the door. And every one of those things is an important aspect of exactly what you're talking about. And we've had to do exactly the same thing here. If all we were trying to do was to sell point of sale like we were, 23 years ago when we started, we wouldn't exist any longer. You have to have multiple
Well,
places that you're
and
bringing around.
it's interesting. I don't know how many of the pharmacists listening would know this, but your dad was really actually ahead of the curve. So he bought the Washington State liquor license. So if you wanted to buy a six pack, we spent a lot of time in your store. You also had school supplies. You also had a pharmacy. You also had the shampoos. You also had, if I recall, art or kind of beach art at the beginning to your right, over on the right.
Yeah, right.
You had candy. I remember as a kid, I'd get M&Ms if I went there. My mom would let me, like every other time I went. So you didn't have produce or your milk and your eggs, but we went to your store for a lot more than pharmaceutical stuff, a lot more.
Yeah, and you're right, Colin. Even back in those days, he wasn't carrying any groceries, and today he is. He just retired about a year ago and sold his store to another young couple. But yes, he evolved and continued to evolve, and that was, I think, you're right. My parents were constantly evolving, but one thing you may not know, the independent pharmacy world has also changed dramatically. So the day of those really large front end stores, those are pretty limited. You still see that in rural places around the country, but just like here in Olympia, when I started RMS, there were 5 independent pharmacies, and they were all that same size. 8,000 square foot front ends, full inventory of all kinds of things, including school supplies and toys and all of those things. Those days are gone. 10 years ago, all the independent pharmacies here were closed. 5 years ago, there was 5. Now today, there's 5 independent pharmacies again, but this time they're apothecary in nature, very little front ends, and they're doing vaccinations and all of those things, the clinical services, compounding and things of that nature. And they found ways to make money, but they can't compete with the local grocery store and Costco on that front end merchandise. So they've changed and evolved. And I think that's the key, is that you're either changing or you're dying, as I said earlier.
Yeah, I felt that my whole career.
Yeah. So let me ask one more question about your new company, Volume. We talked about this before too. It was talking about the importance of hiring good people and the right people. So let's talk about that, because I don't think it's really any different in any business.
Yeah. So I got a sports gaming company to fund our company. It's not an exorbitant amount for what is needed. Podcasting is a very unique space. You do not need real estate. You can do all of it on Zoom. So we don't have an office. I don't need an HR person. We also don't need real estate. We also don't need a lot of marketing because of social media, Instagram, my Twitter accounts. All my podcasters have those. So we have an advantage. But what we wanted to do, we wanted to have a mission statement as I started this. And I'm a broadcaster, not a business person, but my dad was in the market. He had the Wall Street Journal around, and I have a lot of friends in business. And so I wanted to create a company where we could both win. The pressure was on me, not just the employee. And so we do 1+1 contracts. So you have a guaranteed 1 year. And after a year, you have the right to leave me, or I have the right to leave you. These are not massive contracts. A highly paid podcaster could be $60,000. You hear these media, a big salary for a Jim Nance. That's not what we're dealing with here. And so what it creates is an urgency, is that I have to it forces me to listen to my employees and treat them well, but it also forces them to create productive content. And I really like it. And we've had to be emotionally disciplined. There's people that we think we may not be able to maintain, but it really forces my tiny management team and myself to really be aware of our employees, how they see the world, how they think, and be treated like I always wanted to be treated. Now, I was mostly treated very well by corporate America because I think I brought kind of a unique talent to my space. But, I've told everybody that we're going to treat podcasters like we think broadcasters deserve to be treated, which is allowed to make mistakes. I will be supportive. You are artists. They spill paint. You're not going to be lectured. You're not going to be hauled off to, PR prison. And I think it gives there's a freedom as a broadcaster hiring broadcasters that they know I've made mistakes. We're not here to be punitive. We're here to learn, teach, see the world differently. And so far it's worked. It's been really, really fun. But again, the word I would go back to, you think these are, you would never put disciplined and, creative. We have to be both. We have to be emotionally disciplined to our mantras and our business, but we have to be creative and be willing to allow mistakes. And it's a real delicate balance because broadcasters have their egos and their vanity, and we're all probably insecure who do this for a living. We want to be noticed. And so it's really been fun it's amazing. I don't know how this works for a pharmacist, but it's amazing. One of the things that I did, Brad, when I created this company, and it was really cool. So I talked to somebody about creating this company, and he said, Colin, a lot of people you hire, they may have been fans. They may have listened to you. You've been on the air for 20 years on the radio. And so I thought about that. So what I did with everybody I hired, I got their phone number and I would call them randomly. Some didn't pick up the call. And when they did, I would say, hey, this is Colin Cowherd. I had a couple cry, a couple young broadcasters that like I was their, I was who they sat in the back of a car with their grandma or their mom listening. And I wanted to create this real bond with them. I wanted to surprise them and let them know, hey, you're good. You're not making a lot of money now. I completely, absolutely believe in you. And you're going to be one of the first 10 hires for my company. That's how much I believe in you. And I think it's created a real bond with my employees that those were amazing phone calls. They were just amazing moments where you'd hear giggling. Some didn't know how to react. Some would scream, Mom, you're not going to believe who's on the phone. That guy that drives you nuts on the radio in the morning. It was really, I was calling people in Jersey, Iowa, Alabama. It was just this kaleidoscope of the country. And it was really a neat experience for me. But again, I can't compete with networks. I can't afford to. So how do I create this visceral, this emotional bond with these young, talented people? And it's a challenge, but it's been worth every second.
Yeah, I love that story. That's terrific. And I think it really points out though, you're investing in people that you see there's a drive. They have motivation. They're, they love what they're doing. And you wouldn't be doing that. I mean, you're taking a risk too in rewarding somebody. I mean, you have a brand. You, Colin Cowherd, are a brand. And those people can, represent your brand. Just like in a pharmacy, I think, where you talked about this, because you've been doing this for 20 years. Think about pharmacists like my dad, who knew generations of families, especially in rural America, right? And I think it's sad sometimes when you hire the wrong people and you don't get rid of them fast enough, and the damage that an experience that somebody has, a negative experience somebody has with an employee who hasn't been trained properly, who doesn't handle a situation properly, how damaging that can be to your business and that community that you created over a career. So I think, to me, and this is one of the things that I really focus on here at RMS, is hiring the right people. And when you do get the wrong person, which we do take responsibility for, we go, how do we do that? How do we make sure we don't do that again? But you have to let those people move on
Yeah.
sooner than later.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's hard. I was talking to a friend who's an NFL general manager of the LA Chargers, Tom Telesco, and they beat the Chiefs this weekend.
They sure did.
And I'm Tom's a dear friend, so I was just literally so nervous watching the game because they've almost beaten the Chiefs so many times, right? They nobody gives away wins like the Chargers do. And I told him after the game, I just texted him. I'm like, I'm so happy for you. I was a nervous damn wreck watching this game. I became a 9-year-old fan again. And he texted me back and he goes, it's so hard to win. You just don't understand. Sports is imperfect. You need everybody to buy in. And he said, we have this quarterback, Justin Herbert, and he has created everybody believes in him. And he said, to create a belief system among 55 alpha males, these are guys with strong convictions and healthy egos, and many are 24, 25. They're still forming personalities. He said to win games like this, you have to have such a belief system, and it all starts with our young quarterback from Oregon. And it goes back to, I think, the pharmacy business or my business. I've worked so hard at what I do. I really believe in my content. I really believe in myself. And I have that inner scoreboard confidence that I don't worry about the noise. That said, I've made mistakes with hires. And
sure, we all do.
Hey, the best general managers whiff. Bill Polian's a Hall of Fame general manager. He built the Buffalo Bills into a Super Bowl team. They went to 4 of them. He built Peyton Manning's Colts. So twice he rebuilt organizations. And I asked him one time, he was very funny. Bill's a friend of mine. I said, did you ever just totally whiff? Like literally you knew instantly when you drafted the guy. He goes, yeah. He goes, I'm not going to say his name, as we drafted an offensive lineman. And by the second practice, Peyton Manning looked at me and I looked at him. And he just goes, I apologize. I deeply apologize for that draft pick. And he said, it's the worst feeling in the world. But some people, they get to the professional level and they're overwhelmed. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. You'll have players quit. You'll have players emotionally. They shrink in big spots. And you just, Peter Chernon's a very successful investor in my space. And I asked him when I created the volume, I said, could you give me some advice, a nugget? And he said, double down quickly on what works and do not get stubborn with what doesn't. He goes, Amazon started as a bookstore. Netflix started with VHS tapes. Like don't be loyal to what's not working. Well, your job is to identify what is and what isn't, and then activate your response.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's hundreds and hundreds of businesses that have that story. Blockbuster. Look at the difference between Blockbuster and Netflix. Blockbuster saw them, as a rental place, a brick and mortar rental place, and didn't invest at all in digital content. And look where they are today. They don't exist.
Yeah.
And look at where Netflix is.
They're right.
The biggest creator of original content now.
Yeah. In the world.
So, yeah. So well, we could talk for days, I'm sure. I do have to ask this though. Boy, the mighty seem to have fallen over the weekend. Russell and the Seahawks tanked. The Chiefs tanked. Tom Brady and the Buccaneers tanked. What's going on in the NFL?
Well, it's a 17-game season, so you've added a game. And what you're finding is a lot of the teams did not play starters in the preseason at all. So the preseason now has changed. It's almost a waste of time. It really is. I mean, you get to a point now where I've argued for the last couple of years, I would just hold scrimmages, intense scrimmages. Veterans don't want to play. Young players, they don't want to play. And so what happens is September can be experimental.
Yeah.
But I always tell people, Bill Belichick's worst month has always been September. His best month is December. And if you go look at the Andy Reids and the Pete Carrolls and the Belichicks and the very good coaches, this is a process of growth. And there is room with a 17-game schedule to experiment, to play players you might not post-Thanksgiving, My primary concern with the Seahawks is their secondary's weak and you can beat them death by 1,000 cuts. So Russell Wilson is becoming a spectator in the second half of games. He's watching and then when he gets in, he feels that he's got to create something. They may overcoach, overthink, because they feel they're not going to get the ball back if they fail. So then it psychologically affects how you call plays and this sense of we've got to do something special or we won't get the ball back. So I think they'll work themselves through it. But in 3 games, they have been overwhelmed in time of possession. Yeah. When your best player is watching the game and not playing it, that's a problem.
That's a huge problem. Absolutely. So, well, Colin, I really, really appreciate you being here with us today. This has been terrific. I hope all of our viewers have had a fun time as well and learned a few tidbits of information. So maybe we can have you back at some point.
I'd love to. I love that. I have no idea. I don't know who I'm talking to. So I'm picturing all these pharmacists in their jackets literally filling orders, and then they're listening to the sports guy talk as they're filling orders at their pharmacies around Cheney, Washington and Des Moines, Iowa. I have no idea who I'm talking to. I hope I've enlightened them.
Well, I know it's been a lot of fun. I know it's been a lot of fun for me. So it's pretty cool to be on this side of talking to Colin Cowherd and doing the questions and hearing the answers. So I do really appreciate your time, and thank you for being on our first anniversary show. So this has been a lot of fun for me. Climb doing this on a monthly basis has just really, I was really nervous about it when we started this whole process. And I think over the last year, we brought a lot of great content to the pharmacy industry because we bring usually speakers that are very, very well known in the pharmacy world, as well as panelists that are usually pharmacy peers, their peers, to talk about the things like we did earlier today with a panel that talked about the things that are working in pharmacy. So it's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate all of the people out there that have made this possible on my team and some consultants that we brought in. And I appreciate all of the people who have really stuck in there and come to listen to our live version and then come back and listen to recorded content. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of people as we post this on the internet. They'll find this and listen to our conversation. And I'm sure there's a few stories that nobody else has ever heard today.
You know what? Let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
The journalist in me. Give me an exciting prescription either on the horizon, that something that excites you after 30 years in this business, that maybe it's an innovation in cancer treatment or something happening in the pharmaceutical world that excites you, that you see either just entering the business or on the horizon. Tough question, huh? That's why I'm a journalist.
Yeah, you might have given me a heads up on this one, Colin.
That's funny. And hey, I've tried Viagra. You can't use that as an answer, okay? Whatever.
Well, I think I think that the exciting things for pharmacy and as we continue into the future, both on a technology side and so you have the technology side that is continuing to offer all kinds of new solutions, and I think there's a number of innovative things that are happening on that side. But I think the biggest thing is really on the clinical services side, where pharmacies have this amazing opportunity to interact with their patients much more directly and really have an impact on the outcome of their health. So using wellness programs and disease state management, these are things that they've been around now for a little while in pharmacy, but pharmacies are starting to get paid for them. But they're also starting to realize that if they start doing these things, they bring to the table those sticky points that you're talking about
Yes.
that bring more patients in, give them a reason to be there. And there's all kinds of things that they can make money off of once they've done that. And that creates a loyalty to the pharmacy. And I honestly, I'm a technology guy and I love all of the things that are coming down the pike in the technology world. But really when it boils down to it, it's human interaction that matters.
Right.
It's not technology. Technology can lead you and give you some additional things that you can do, but it's all about interpersonal relationships. And that's what makes all the difference. So, I mean, as a technology guy, I love the idea of using more and more of our technology. But all we are is conduit to help you with that personal interaction. And it's all boils down to the personal interaction in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever going to change.
No, and it's interesting. I had a little health scare about a year ago, and I've done several of these Zoom calls either on my phone or in this space. And it's amazing the quality of care I've received from everybody in the medical profession, pharmacists down. They really, I know LA is a big city. That's where I live. People are in a hurry, but I have been struck by the decency and the genuine concern. I'm always blown away. It's like America's very best. I'm just blown away. If you look at the stress we have put on our medical profession due to the pandemic in the last 2 years, and the service to me is better than it's ever been. The quality of people is remarkable. And they've never been more stressed. They've never had more chaos and obstacles, but it makes me very hopeful. I know there's a lot of cynicism and, if you listen to the media, the doom is near every corner. But in the world in which I live in the last year with my little physical scare, I am so encouraged by the quality of healthcare in America.
Well, I think, and I'm going to add to that too. We have to be careful about listening to the media, right? And
Right.
you bring that up in your second book, honestly. You talk about that. And I think one of the things, and I know we were about to end, and now we're not. Now we're going down a different path. But I think this is an important path because when we have information overload now, you now have social media that it can be in your face. Everything can be in your face 24/7. And then we have the problem of confirmation bias. So now when we as humans, we naturally have that problem. But now you have computers, algorithms, Google, that are actually
feeding it
the things that they think you're going to be interested in. And so now we're hearing more and more just the things that a computer thinks that we should be reading. And so I think you're right. I think that we hear a lot of negatives, but I'm not sure that the negatives are nearly as bad as they may not be any worse than they've ever been. It's just that now it's in our face all the time.
Of course. That's a great point, is that, I've said this on the air. Most people still like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a glass of milk, and to watch TV at night. That's how most of us are entertained. You think everybody is watching Netflix and they're paying for all these cable. Netflix's penetration in America is like 18%. Most of us watch sports on cable or have a favorite show on ABC, NBC, CBS, as most of us live very habit-formed lives. We like simplicity. We love our dogs. We love our kids. We have friends. Our teams drive us nuts. We love to be loved. Nobody likes to laugh. For me, a good steak with a buddy and a big laugh that's never changed in my life. Is that there are books written about this, that the choices confuse us, but simplicity is where we generate most of our happiness, in the things that we rely on, that we trust, that we've known since we were 20 years old, 15 years old.
Yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree. So, well, once again, now we can wrap up, and I know we've kept everybody over, but I hope you really found this fun, and I certainly did. So thanks again, Colin. And
Oh, I love
appreciate it.
it.
And good luck. Yeah, good luck in your newest venture.
We'll talk soon. Send
Yeah.
my best to everybody. I'm so proud of you. Not surprised at all.
The same
But
to
it's
you,
just great.
my friend.
Just great.
And let's get together in Park City.
Let's do it. That I like. There we go. All right.
Okay. Thanks again, Colin.
All right. Thanks, everybody.